Hello everybody, it's Wyvern here with another bit of Total War Warhammer quick match gameplay. This time around I am once again playing as Wood Elves against the Beastmen, led by Lack, on the map Mushroom Cave. So I think both sides this time around did have a fairly conventional setup. Deployment though wasn't entirely conventional. So for my comp, I once again ran the Glady on a Eagle. That way it was cheaper on points, and still gave me that mobility to poke and kite at the enemy. Beastmen obviously don't really bring many flying units, so I wasn't really worried about that, but just wanted that extra mobility and ability to poke down my opponent while being fairly cheap. Backed up, of course, by the Branch Wraith, which I used the last game as well. This time, though, I dropped the Withering because Beastmen don't tend to bring a lot of units with armor, except Gorbals, and so I figured Melkosmith's Flying Miasma and Earthblood would be adequate. For my front line, running only 3 units of Eternal Guard with shields. Obviously, Beastmen don't tend to run too much shooting, but just in case they do, shields would be decent, and perhaps more importantly, it does boost their melee defense, which will make them a bit tankier against most Beastmen infantry, which will otherwise probably just steamroller them. They are backed up by 1 unit of Gladiator with Starfire Shafts over here. Magic and armor piercing damage just to take out some of those harder targets, say Minotaurs, Bestigors, or Gorbals. And behind that, once again, I decided to do the 2-2 setup of War Dancers. We got War Dancers with Azure Spear out on here on the flank, ready to shut down any potential cavalry coming in from the flanks, or reinforce the front line if needed. Similarly, these War Dancers with swords can push in or flank, depending on what the situation demands. And of course, they are backed by the all these units are being buffed by the Branch Wraith, increasing their speed and increasing their melee attack when within a certain radius. And of course, because this battle line is fairly short, they will all be getting this bonus. Then I've got 2 units of generic Wild Riders. Once again, Beastmen don't tend to bring much in the way of shooting, so I did bring 2 units of Wild Riders here. Without shields, and they're just going to give me some mobility. Obviously, I'm not running the Hawk Riders this time around. These guys will give me some ability to shut down enemy flanking maneuvers and to rear charge enemy infantry once they die down in combat with me. And then all the way out here on the flanks, in the very back, I do have Deepwood Scouts with Swifter Shards. Mostly trying to get that DPS out as quickly as possible, hoping just to zone the enemy away, and with my cavalry, and just to shout as much damage as I can with these guys. Now, back here in the corner, as you probably noticed, I'm deploying back here in the corner, and that's because Beastmen do tend to do Vanguard deploy, especially against Wood Elves. I've seen it several times now, and I don't want to let my opponent get the jump on me and simply crash into me straight from the front. And this way I'll also have time to get my cooldowns off on my Glade Lord, that sort of thing. Now my opponent decided to spread out quite a bit more. Ran 2 units of Centaurs with great weapons, with 2 units of Chaos Warhounds. One of those is over here with a bit of flying support from Harpies, and the other is all the way on the other side of the map right here. Ready to flank, probably assuming that I would spawn right here in the middle. But also, as you can see, the entire center of this map on this side is basically filled with water, and that slows down foot units, and most of my army is infantry, so I don't want to be fighting in that sort of terrain if I can possibly avoid it. That's definitely something you want to keep in mind, whether or not you're fighting in woods. Woods can greatly debuff enemy cavalry. Sorry, it's a little slow, so I'm going to start. But, yeah, woods can definitely debuff cavalry, and water debuffs infantry quite a bit. My opponent ran several units of Goreherds with shields, with some buffs, and a unit of Angors over here in the middle, probably just to get a dirt cheap infantry, and they are hidden. Then 2 units of Bestigors to deal with armor, and a unit of Minotaurs with shields back here, definitely going to be resilient against shooting because they do have silver shields. Bracement of Death with Spirit Leech and Fit of Buna. Definitely could dish out quite a bit of hurt, and of course Mortar the Shadowgrave, who is a bit of a go-to pick. As you can see, I immediately push forward with the Glade Lord, or my Glady, and start sniping away at the Harpies. Harpies are not all that mobile, actually, given that they're an air unit. They only have 82 speed, which puts them below most other air units. They're immediately being picked off one by one. I don't want them dropping on my archers later on if I can avoid it. And I do kind of want to just get some early game damage in. I don't want to push in too far because I wasn't sure if my opponent had any Ungor Raiders, so I definitely wanted to avoid that a bit. So I do fall back with the Glady. And then I see the Bracement of Death, so I go back to snipe away at him, do a little bit of damage, see what I can do. And my opponent is actually pushing the Base Shaman out, trying to get a Spirit Legion on me, but I do have a Potion of Toughness and a Potion of Foolhardy, so I'm not too worried about early damage. And I decided to start peppering away at him, dishing out quite a bit of missile damage here. Shortly I'll get an Arrows of Kurnus off. He doesn't have a shield, so he's very vulnerable to arrow fire. Yeah, he does get a Spirit Leech off, but once again I'll be able to undo that. I'm just peppering him away at him with arrow fire. And here I pop the Arrows of Kurnus, get a meaty hit off, good 400 HP. And as you can see right now, it's mostly just posturing. I did push out these Wild Riders a little bit too far. I'll shortly pull them back. And over here on the flank, my opponent is slowly trying to sneak his cavalry around, getting into my rear guard. So I will shortly shift these archers away because I don't want them getting caught. And these Wild Riders will move to match his cavalry over there. In the meantime, Glady is still sniping away at the Brave Shaman of Death. He is wavering. I don't want to get caught by the Harpies, so I pull away. Unfortunately, the Eagle has very little armor, and you definitely don't want to get caught in melee. But as you can see, the Brave Shaman is already wavering. His morale is very low. He's under half health, and though he will recover, it means that just a little bit of pressure later on will be enough to push him away for good. It definitely means that something like a Fate of Buna has been avoided. Now here, the arrows do pierce on a Glade Lord, so I do get quite a bit of damage here. And of course I just keep kiting him here. I think there's like 3 or 4 kills there on the Harpies, which is really solid. Get another shot off here. And get another, actually 5 kills, so very solid. When units are clumped up like this, squishy units like Harpies, then you can get massive amounts of work done with the Glade Lord. And in the meantime, my opponent is pushing around my rear line over here. As you can see, my archers are already on their way out, and shortly thereafter, my Wild Riders will start moving into intercept. And I'll start moving these War Dancers. Now, War Dancers with swords are not really meant to fight cavalry. Unfortunately, I tell these guys to move, and they only move at a walk, so that was a bit of a mistake. But War Dancers with swords aren't meant against cavalry, but because Beastmen cavalry has such weak armor, and so do Warhounds, they can actually perform fairly well in conjunction with, say, Wild Riders. My opponent does see me pushing back. He hasn't actually spotted my archers yet, but he does see me pushing to counter him. And I actually hit him with a Prey of Anathema. I plan to wipe this flank out before all of his infantry can push in here and engage me on the front. I throw the Wild Riders in. He does counteract with the Chaos Warhounds, which will definitely spread out the damage that my Wild Riders are doing. But as you can see, the Centaurs are melting very quickly. Their morale is dropping. They are being sniped away at by the Glade Lord. Unfortunately, Arrow of Kurnus there did get absorbed right here by the rock outcrop. But in the meantime, War Dancers are almost on top of my opponent. And once they're there, this is going to be all over for him. And Centaurs, though quick, I do believe that once their morale breaks, they are not fast enough to outrun Wild Riders. They just match them for speed, so they will be run down and run off the map. Over here, I do open fire with the archers, which does reveal this unit over here. So now my opponent doesn't know about that. The bolt's been shot there, kind of. But I do start chasing with Wild Riders, and unfortunately I forget about them, and I allow them to keep pursuing, and they actually end up getting him to melee. But Wild Riders are pretty solid, and they will actually outtrade both the Centaurs and the Warhounds, or trade about evenly with them, especially with their initial charge going in. Over here, though, my opponent does push Gorehorde with shields around the flank. In the meantime, I'm trying to absorb the initial charges over here on the Eternal Guard with shields. Over here, Swift Shivers are going in, trying to soften up my opponent a little bit. The Eternal Guard, of course, gets hit by the Minotaurs, but that doesn't really matter. They have resistance against large, and the War Dancers go in. Now, War Dancers are not ideal against Gores or Bestigors, but they have very high melee defense, the War Dancers with spears, so they will actually hold out fairly well there. Especially with the arrow fire coming in, whittling down these Minotaurs, and that whole block of units over there. Now, I did drive off the Centaurs, and because it's so close to the map's edge, they will actually flee off the map. Unfortunately, my Wild Riders do get broken by the Warhounds with poison, and they'll shortly rout as well. Over here, though, these Wild Riders have recovered, or have won that fight, driven both of these enemy units off the... Actually, I think only... Oh no, they didn't drive the Centaurs, they drove one of the units off the field. Now they're coming back for rear charge. Azrai are coming back, gonna try to mob these Harpies. Fortunately, my opponent did get these Gores on top of the U-boat scouts, definitely shutting them down very effectively. Over here, I did snipe the Brave Shaman of Death with my final Arrow of Kurnus, and hit him once with an arrow, and that is enough for him. He's broken and is starting to flee. He does, I believe, get a cast off something. I'm not entirely sure what. Unfortunately, my Eternal Guard here is having, I do believe, yeah, my opponent doesn't get his first unit of Chaos spawn out over there. But unfortunately, the War Dancers with Azrai Spear are there. But I actually decided to, rather than fighting my opponent on that, and here, as you can see, the charge is breaking my opponent's Gorehorde fairly quickly. And Azrai Spear is solely against Bestigors, who are actually more expensive, and against Gores. So I actually drop in Prey of Anathema just to time down so I don't have to worry about them, and in the meantime they'll of course just be degenerating, and I push these Azrai Spears in, trying to deal with my opponent's Minotaurs. Gladiator will eventually deal with these Harpies, though the Ungor Herd of course will be able to maul him pretty significantly. The Starfire Shafts are trying to pepper down Murgur. He is unfortunately in the cluster of my infantry, so they're not going to be able to hit too much. But I am trying to make use of my Wild Riders, my remaining unit of them, just cycling around, being a pain. And now I'm pulling these War Dancers back, trying to deal with these Warhounds over here. Unfortunately, they do get on top of my archers, and they will be able to beat them up. Because this whole fight is happening so close to the map edge, any sort of break or rout here is likely to be a complete retreat off the map. My Glade Lord is starting to run low on ammo. I do pop a shot into Morgur here. But of course, he does have regeneration, so he will recover pretty effectively. And so I do charge my Glady in. I have not actually used my potion of healing yet. This was an Earthblood, so I do get some damage in there. The Eternal Guard are holding fairly well against the Cow Spawn. Not ideally, of course, but fairly well. I do drop a Melkot's Mystifying Miasma on the Ungor Herd. It's actually pretty effective against squishy units like this. Basically a weaker variant of the Flock of Doom. And here, the rear charge from the Wild Riders has actually successfully broken the Gore Herd and the Bestigors, wavering and breaking. As you can see, the War Dancers are definitely held out very well. A very high melee defense is incredibly useful, and the War Dancers with swords are just dishing out immense amounts of hurt to the Gores and the Ungors, who have no armor, and even the Minotaurs, who have very low armor, are getting demolished. My archers, though, do break. They are forced to flee, and I do believe they will all rout off the battlefield. The Centaurs, my opponent finally realizes they were staying around there, and he starts pulling them back. So definitely a bit of a problem for me. The Eternal Guard are still holding, which is definitely no mean feat. And I do start pulling some more Eternal Guard over here, trying to shut my opponent down. He does pop another unit of Chaos Spawn. Morgur does have 4 entire units of Chaos Spawn to pop, potentially, so that is definitely something I'm a little worried about. And as you can see, unfortunately, I actually do send my War Dancers to attempt a shutdown on the Bestigors, not realizing that the Bestigors do come back. That is definitely a bit of a problem. These War Dancers are pursuing for a little bit, but then I shortly come back, trying to shut down Morgur, dealing with these Chaos Spawn. I did get the Potion of Healing off. I do believe it's been used up now. And this Gore Herd is finally breaking. Most of my opponent's army is really badly beat up. These Harpies should be coming back, so should these Warhounds. My Wild Riders are pursuing these Minotaurs off the field. I want to make sure they don't come back no matter what. But now these Azrai Spears do engage with the Bestigor Herd, and that's not really their best ideal engagement for them. Not terrible, but not ideal. But they will actually come out on top because they do have decent armor piercing. Over here I'm trying to melt down Morgur the Shadowgave, but he is actually very resilient somehow. He has fairly high melee defense, which is probably helping. I do tie down these Centaurs with a Prayer of Anathrema. I've actually been using it more like a Net of Mintok this game, just to kind of tie down my opponent, prevent him from helping. I send the War Dancers with swords in, just to sort of melt them down. As you can see, they do a lot of damage to the Centaurs with great weapons, especially when there's no charge coming in. That is definitely a big problem for War Dancers. Normally, if they get charged, they will die very quickly. Over here, though, as you can see, War Dancers with Azrai Spears, despite taking quite a bit of hurt, are actually beating the Bestigor Herd in melee and will shortly force them to rout. So definitely trading more than effectively there. And the Glady over here just sitting around looking pretty. I don't have any ammo left, and I don't want to charge her in because Morgur did do a lot of damage to her last time around. So I definitely want to be a little careful. The Chaos Warhounds do run away, and there's another unit of Chaos Spawn on the field. I do believe it's the third one this game, so my opponent is definitely starting to run low on his charges, so I should shortly be fine. I do forget about these Wild Riders over here, unfortunately, and so I don't get them quite yet. These Bestigors are broken. I'm trying to chase them off, but unfortunately my opponent's Ungors and Bestigors over here are regrouping, and so they will start pushing back to attack my Azrai Spears. And of course Morgur actually succeeds in escaping, and of course he does have regeneration, so he will be regenerating at least for a little while until he hits his healing cap. And these Chaos Spawn are just tying me down. They'll do solid against War Dancers, but with the branch right there, the War Dancers with Azrai Spears and the Eternal, and actually I think I'm out of Eternal Guard at this point, but except for this unit over here who's courageously holding off the Warhounds and the Centaurs. But definitely did quite a bit of damage and just melt them down fairly quickly. And I was sending the Wild Riders in, trying to deal with Morgur over here. The War Dancers have won another battle. These guys have just been winning left and right, crushing everybody, and they're finally coming back to deal with help deal with these Bestigors, help deal with Morgur, just put a nail in my opponent's coffin, hopefully. This unit is breaking for good. They will not be coming back. The Centaurs with great weapons are struggling a little bit with morale. They're shaken. Definitely at risk of breaking. Some of my opponent's units are starting to shatter, and my units are still holding pretty well. Between the encourage from the Branch Wraith, the encourage from the Glady, and just the fact that they're doing pretty well against these Chaos Spawn and Morgur is definitely just helping them stay in the fight. Plus, it's important to remember that War Dancers are immune to psychology, which, while their morale might not be the highest in comparison to, say, Eternal Guard, it does mean that against fear from the Chaos Spawn is definitely not nearly as effective as it could be otherwise. And these guys are melting down very quickly. My Branch Wraith is still very healthy. Unfortunately, I am out of, I don't have enough mana for Earthblood, and I'm not going to have it, I realize. I'm not going to have enough Wounds of Magic, so I pop a Melkot's Mystifying Miasma on the Chaos Warhounds, which does enough damage to break them. I was hoping initially just to slow them down, get time to wipe out these units, but it does prove enough to break and then shatter my opponent's army. And that is it for the replay as I wipe out the last remaining Chaos Spawn over there. Definitely a very fun battle, very close battle. Let's see the endgame results here. As you can see, a lot of units, even if relatively healthy, did end up routing off the field when some with some health still around. If they were not within range of a Lord, they did route off because of the proximity to the map edge. As you can see, my losses were rather high, only 135 models remaining. My opponent did have 169, but of course some of those are just weaker units left over, like the Chaos Warhounds with poison. Definitely, I think one of the most significant plays there for me was shutting down that Beastmen of Death. The fact that I was able to shut that down meant there was no Fate of Bunas going down. That meant there was no more Spirit Leeches on my Lord, and any of those could have been enough to shift the tide here if my opponent had been able to kill either my Glady or my Wild Riders off. That definitely could have been enough to tip the odds in their favor. Now, Eternal Guard don't dish out a lot of damage, or not too much extra damage against Beastmen because their armor piercing is practically useless there. But they definitely held the line fairly effectively and went down almost to a man. So definitely a very, very solid performance from him. The Branch Wraith incredibly useful with those buffs to damage, though or to melee attack, but I don't think he was getting too much work done in melee himself. I think most of the time he was fighting Morgar. But definitely a very solid pick, plus the Earthblood helped to keep my units in the fight. Malkoth's Mystifying Miasma actually pretty useful at melting down Ungors, helping break down the Chaos Warhounds. And actually, it's important to remember, if you can break a unit, then you can potentially cause other units' morale to drop, and that can be enough to cause a chain rout. Even if they do come back eventually, that can definitely weaken your opponent significantly. The Glady definitely got that early game sniping in, whittled down the Beastmen of Death, helped Prey of Anathrema was shutting down the Centaurs, was helping shut down the Chaos Spawn when they came, that sort of thing. Definitely very useful. Also, the Eternal Guard absorbed that initial charge from the Minotaurs, which meant that from there on out I could just kind of shoot them down. The War Dancers with swords and the War Dancers with spears actually dished out a lot of hurt, and as you can see, none of these guys went in with any chevrons, and despite that, they all gained 1, and this unit even gained 2, killing those Chaos Spawn, killing the Minotaurs, that sort of, and the Centaurs probably. So definitely all dishing out a lot of damage, and this definitely shows that the War Dancers, when they are able to go into like a flanking situation, when they're not eating the charge and they're just able to go in and dish out a lot of hurt, they can definitely do amazing work. Even against units that are, say, like the Bestigor herd, despite being more expensive than War Dancers Azrai Spear, and the fact that the War Dancers are obviously more expensive for the fact that they're fast, or a lot of their cost is driven up by their speed and their bonus against large, they actually still managed to take on the Bestigor herd and an Ungor herd, or sorry, a Gore herd with shields. And once the Wild Riders came in, they were holding about even, and once the Wild Riders came in for that rear charge, they definitely managed to break my opponent and actually come out on top. So definitely a very, very powerful unit. Got very good use this game. This other unit, as you can see, just dishing out damage to large units. Glade Guard with Starfire Shafts didn't get much done, but they did get a little bit of damage in on the Minotaurs, which was what I was trying to focus out early on. Minotaurs are definitely a threat, even though I had a lot of anti-large on the field. It's much better to just wipe them out quickly, not have to deal with them in the long run. Deepwood Scouts also got a little bit of damage on the Minotaurs, and then try to whittle down Morgar, but I do believe that because of my own units blocking them, they didn't get too much done there. I do think my range contingent didn't quite work out as I had hoped, because I ended up losing this unit of Wild Riders, which opened up an entire flank, and that was definitely a miss micro on my part, but the opening up of that flank meant that the Deepwood Scouts ended up getting crushed, and so did the Glade Guard. By the Warhounds and the Ungor herd, I do believe it was. Or maybe it was just the Gore herd with shields. And then, of course, this unit of Wild Riders did very well in just shutting down a unit of Centaurs in a straight up, I think it was this unit, in a straight up head-to-head fight, despite the fact that they had the support of the Chaos Warhounds. But they themselves got driven off the field, and because it was so close to the map edge, both units ended up fleeing, and that was actually a net loss for me, point-wise. And then this unit of Wild Riders, just amazing work. It initially helped shut down those Centaurs, drive off those Chaos Warhounds, then came back and cycle charged the back of my opponent's line, just dished out a whole bunch of hurt. Very useful unit. 130 kills, leveled up twice. So once again, a lot of damage going out there. My opponent went with a fairly conventional build for Beastmen. Gorbals are a pretty popular pick, but given the Elves' tendency to bring a lot of anti-large in their front line, the fact that Wood Elves can snipe you down, have a lot of ranged fire, that sort of thing, Gorbals can fall fairly quickly against that, and so might not have been the best picks, and definitely so my opponent didn't go with those. Instead he went with the Beastmen of Death and Morgar the Shadowgate. Now the Beastmen can be pretty potent. Fate of Buna is obviously popular for shutting down heavy cav, but against something like Wild Riders, even though they are squishy, it can do immense amounts of work and just destroy them. And if my opponent had been able to, say, destroy this unit of Wild Riders with the Fate of Buna, that would have probably been enough to tip the balance of the battle because those rear charges were absolutely decisive. Morgar the Shadow got a decent amount of kills. More importantly, I think got all 4 of his spawn units off, which combined with the fact that there was an insta-kill, I do believe that's actually why these Eternal Guard got wiped out. Because between the focused attacks of my opponents and the fact that Morgar turned him into spawn, that was just a bit of a pain in the rear to have to deal with all those Gale spawn. And it definitely wasted a pair of Anathrema that I just timed down, that sort of thing. Morgar is definitely a very cost-efficient lord, and this was very visible in this game. The Ungors did okay. They're a dirt cheap unit. They're much cheaper than even Eternal Guard without shields. So, given that, they did some damage. All these units, though, I think went in with chevrons. So, they were a bit more expensive than they normally are. My opponent did bring shields, probably expecting me to bring a lot of shooting, but I didn't. And so that definitely didn't quite work out, I think, the way my opponent expected. The Bestigor Herd was a bit of an interesting choice, because Wood Elves don't tend to bring much large. Perhaps my opponent was thinking I would bring, don't tend to bring much armor. There's not much. The only armored units they really have are Treekin and Treemen. So this was a bit of, I guess, dragons. But this was a bit of an interesting pick, I think. They can technically dish out a lot of damage, but actually, as you saw there, the War Dancers with Azrai Spears, despite being cheaper and very focused on being anti-large and speed, they actually managed to hold their ground just fine against the Bestigors. Their melee attack isn't the highest, so the War Dancers with Azrai Spears who have very high melee defense. Something to remember: the War Dancers have very high melee attack. War Dancers with Spears very high melee defense. They could definitely hold their own against Bestigors, and their melee attack is enough to hit back pretty hard. The Centaurs both did very little. One of the units did end up helping shut down one of my Eternal Guard at the very end, but one got completely routed immediately. I do believe that was this unit, and the other one got pushed back very early on by the Wild Riders, which denied my opponent much in the way of flanking opportunities. Definitely getting early game shut down an opponent's mobility is very useful. Now the Chaos Warhounds definitely did work. They obviously got in Chevron, they got 100 kills, they basically trashed my entire rear line, destroying my Starfire Shafts, my Deepwood Scouts, all that sort of stuff. It's definitely very painful to deal with. I only think I got rid of them at the very end with Melkot's Mystify and Miasma. This other unit, though, I think routed off the field. They got immediately hit by a charge from they tried to tie down the Wild Riders and they failed. They got wrecked. Harpies, despite taking a lot of early fire from the Glady, ended up coming back and dishing out quite a bit of hurt to the Starfire Shout, so that was definitely a bit surprising. Harpies aren't terrible melee combatants, but against squishy units especially, but considering how much damage they took early on, it was a bit surprising. And the Minotaurs were practically useless. I focused them down very early on, shot them down with Deepwood Scouts, Swift Shivers, with the Lady Guard Starfire. Obviously, you had the Branch Wraith in there, and the War Dancers who were just dishing out a lot of hurt, melting them very quickly. So definitely, I think, against Beastmen, even if they do bring Gorbals, I think it is smart to bring, or even if you are expecting Gorbals, which is actually what I was expecting here. Definitely a good idea to bring War Dancers with Azar Spears, War Dancers with swords, as long as you can make a front line of Eternal Guard with shields. War Dancers and War Dancers with Spears will do very well against Beastmen units because their melee stats tend to be fairly low, and once you're able to break their Frenzy or their I think it's called Blood Greed or something like that. Once you're able to break that, they will start falling apart incredibly quickly. Gladiator Guard with Starfire Shafts, you do need definitely more important to micro them. And Wild Riders, once again, very useful unit, just very flexible, dishes out a lot of hurt. Fastest heavy cav in the game, besides or tied with or Centaurs with great weapons, but it's definitely fast cav, and especially with the boost from the Branch Wraith, they're even faster. So a very potent unit, very good use out of it this game. Yeah. I do hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, leave a like or subscribe down below. If you have any comments or criticism, any requests for builds or units you would like to see demonstrated, do feel free to share those down in the comments down below. I will be sure to respond as soon as I can. I appreciate you all for watching, and Wyvern out.